Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Dan and I'm here to bring you another FPL video. In this one, we're going to be looking at my Game Week 27 team selection. We'll be looking at how I got on in my Game Week 26 and also Game Week 25 as well. As for those that don't know, I have recently recovered from COVID, so apologies for the lack of content that's been out in the past few weeks, but unfortunately, yeah, I did feel very, very poorly and back to pretty much what I would say full strength now. You may be able to hear still a little bit of nasally content tonight, so I'm sorry about that in advance, but hopefully you stick with me. Of course, if you enjoy the content, guys, as always, then smash that like button to support the channel. But let's have a look at how we got on first of all in Game Week 25. So cast your minds back a couple of weeks for me. I usually don't go back this far, but just because I couldn't put the content out there, I thought I'd do a very, very quick snapshot of what happened with me. So I didn't actually use any hits here. I just simply used my 2 free transfers. I felt like I kind of got away with this game week a little bit, really. I navigated through it very nicely. Of course, I didn't scramble so much to get too many Liverpool assets in. Of course, Darwin Núñez only starting one game. Of course, the defensive options, Trent was the best out of them, or I say Van Dijk was probably the best out of them, to be honest, in the end. But of course, Trent still bagging a couple of clean sheets. Robertson, unfortunately, being rotated. So a bit of a mess for some people. But 86 points overall and only dropping by 1k in rank. So I was 69k before. Moved to 70k. I felt like I got away with this week, to be honest. And then looking ahead in Game Week 26, I felt this team's in a pretty good place. It wasn't until I actually came down with COVID and I started, looking more on Twitter and on YouTube and seeing that the Game Week 26 wildcard was actually gaining some traction that I started actually future planning and seeing, well, what could I do differently? Do I need to press the button now or not? Does it make sense? And ultimately, I come to the conclusion that it did make sense for me. I'm going to be looking to play the bench boost in Game Week 29, as I know a lot of managers are. It's a huge double game week, and it looks to be the most positive. And when I was future planning, I couldn't see how I would get myself to a very, very strong squad without having to essentially use a chip before the bench boost. I weren't able to do it with free transfers, of course, with the likes of Bueno's injury, for example, who I may have had to, essentially put in my starting 11 in blank Game Week 28 as well. It just felt like there were a couple of things that I needed to adjust, and I couldn't do it and navigate it just using free transfers. So I decided to push the button, and the team is what I landed on. The team I landed on is the team that's in front of you here. And of course, all out this week, guys, only scoring 37 points is probably one of the most disappointing first weeks of a wildcard I've ever had. But I won't judge too much, or I won't jump to any conclusions just yet, because the whole point of this chip is essentially a 4 to 5 game week strategy. I won't let any other manager or any content creator tell me that it's been an unsuccessful week without watching at least another 3 or 4 weeks ahead. We cannot judge the result on just 1 week's outcome. Of course, there are lots of, 30% calls, 50% coin flips in selections, not to a couple to mention here. Henry versus Pinnock versus me was some of those. Of course, Pinnock scoring 7 points, but both me and Henry only scoring 1 point each. We had the March, Matoma and McAllister, the triple Brighton midfield debate. Of course, McAllister and Matoma returning, but March not returning, who landed in my team. So there's just some variance that has meant that certain picks looked worse than others. And I think that some people are jumping to conclusions or judging their outcomes just on those individual bases. But I will not be doing that. I'm going to be waiting and being patient with a couple of my picks here and hoping that they come to fruition and ultimately result me still finishing in the top 100k. That was my goal. That was my aim for the season. Of course, it'd be fantastic to finish any higher, but still being part of the 1% club in terms of total managers is an achievement in itself, right? So I'm absolutely happy with the rank on where I am. Slightly disappointed with the first week, yes, but we move forward. So I don't really feel like there's anything else that I can say. All the points are on screen here. It's a really disappointing week. So we're just going to move straight into what my possible transfer routes are for Game Week 27. Now, of course, when you post wildcard, you're not really looking to want to have to make transfers at all, if I'm honest. My plan realistically was to roll, and that is one of the options that I'll be showcasing in this video. But ultimately, Sanchez to looks like a possibility for me now. Now we've got the news that De Zerbi is not fully 100% trusting of Robert Sanchez in this moment. I think his press conference basically stated that he thinks Jason Steele is just a little bit above Sanchez in terms of overall performance and output. And to be honest with you, they kept their clean sheet. So, after a 4-0 victory at West Ham, I haven't watched highlights and I don't know how he got on in that starting number one position for Brighton. But ultimately, I don't see any reason why De Zerbi would then go back on himself 1 week later and just all of a sudden just start Robert Sanchez again. So I think it makes sense to target another double game week player and just do the free swap from Sanchez to Raya. Of course, that does mean I'll end up on a double up of Brentford defence, which I'm not too keen on longer term, but I can solve that later down the line by removing Rico Henry post game week 29, I think. I don't mind having Raya and Kepa as a rotation from now until game week 38, to be honest. So I feel like this is probably the most obvious move that I can make, but there is also an option for a -4 if I'm feeling a little bit spicy by the time the deadline comes. And that is this. By moving Sanchez on to Raya, I actually free up the third Brighton slot. So at the moment, my team has got Estepinian, Sanchez, and Solly March. Of course, if I remove Sanchez, that means I am just left with March and Estepinian, freeing up that second midfielder slot as a potential to bring in Matoma for Martin Odegaard. This could also be McAllister as well. They're pretty much the same price, so it could be either or. The difference is here, I suppose, I don't gain an extra fixture because game week 28 means a blank for Matoma. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, on this route, when I've done some future planning, it does mean I'll only have 10 game week 28 players, as I'd have an extra blanking outfield player, if that makes sense. Hopefully that does without some visuals, but ultimately, without talking it through, I'm not 100% sure if I'm confident with it. I think that Odegaard against Fulham this week potentially could do some damage. I think that with Palhinha having his second suspension against Arsenal, I feel like he would probably be the man that marks Odegaard and picks him up in those spaces, as the areas he likes to operate in are between the midfield and the defenders. And that's exactly where Palhinha's kind of, essentially tried to achieve the best defensive possibilities that he could. And I think that's where Odegaard can exploit it if Palhinha is not in the squad. And that's why I'm a little bit hesitant with this. Not only to mention, is it a -4? So not confident with this, but it is still an option that I've considered. And then, of course, as mentioned, the third option really is just to roll the transfer. But again, it's something that it's just a possibility. Something else to mention here then in terms of Fixture Watch, the Champions League and Europa League were also taking place this week. Of course, yesterday evening we did have the conclusion of one fixture in Chelsea and Dortmund. Chelsea have now won the two legs on aggregate have now won over the course of the two legs 2-1. They beat Borussia Dortmund 2-0 on the day, and it's meant that they actually progressed through to the next stage of the Champions League. Now, I think for most managers at this point in time, for our Game Week 27 squads, it's probably not so relevant. I don't feel like there's many Chelsea assets in many people's teams, and I don't think there's much rotation risk there. It's just something to consider when you look at the likes of maybe Reece James, maybe some of their defenders, even their attackers. If you go that route, then just bear in mind that Graham Potter has got extra fixtures to navigate, and we know that he does like a little bit of rotation here and there. Of course, Wednesday tonight, we have Tottenham Hotspur versus AC Milan. That will conclude this fixture as well. And it'll just be interesting to see, I think, really how many minutes Harry Kane gets, if he picks up any injury, something like that. This is more just kind of for that level of information, really. Just, I know a lot of people own Harry Kane now after wildcarding him in. So just something to consider. And then for Thursday games, again, it's just more about keeping an eye on the assets that we own. So in the likes of Odegaard and Saka for me, as well as Gabriel against Sporting. And then, of course, Rashford against Real Betis for Manchester United. So something just to consider, that when you're looking at early transfers potentially, just remember that there are other fixtures outside the Premier League that could impact either rotation or injuries that we may need to be aware of before the deadline. So I just like putting this in essentially to just give you that just recommendation to just sometimes hold fire with any possible transfers. So let's finally have a look then at how I line up for Game Week 27. Now, if I was to make no transfers and Robert Sanchez does stay in the squad, I probably would start him. I don't think I'm going to roll. I do think I'll probably end up selling him. But if I don't, this will probably be how I line up, and I keep him in the squad just in case he gets one of the starts. I then have Rico Henry, Kieran Trippier and Estepinian. So we've got 5 fixtures across those 3 defenders there. Only 2 out of the 5 are actually home fixtures. So Trippier has Wolves at home. Estupiñán has Crystal Palace at home, which I'm hoping for at least 2 clean sheets in those games. Leeds away, of course, can be a bit erratic, but I think Brighton are comfortable enough defensively to be able to come away with that one as well. I just hope Estupiñán doesn't end up being rotated, or, he's any kind of fitness risk realistically. So hopefully he can bag me a couple of clean sheets there. Rico Henry was actually somebody that impressed me in the Fulham game. I felt like he got some great attacking opportunities. I think he picked up a header in the box at one point. Unfortunately, not enough power on it really to challenge Bert Leno. But to be honest, these 2 away fixtures, Everton and Southampton, I think could be really promising for him, not only from a defensive point of view, but because they're away fixtures. Maybe that means that Everton and Southampton are just drawn out that little bit more. And essentially, he is so rapid on this left wing that I genuinely think he can put in some fantastic numbers for us this week. So looking forward to seeing what he could do. Of course, we move into the midfield next up. Then we're pretty much unchanged, except for James Maddison being benched and making way for Solly March. Again, 2 great fixtures for him. And hopefully he's on the right side of Brighton's attacking output this week, and Matoma and McAllister can stay a little bit quiet. So sorry if you are owners of those, but I am going to be hoping that March outscores both of them this week. Of course, we do have the Arsenal guys in Saka and Odegaard against Fulham away. Now, as mentioned, I think the key point here is that Palhinha is suspended still. He has to serve a 2-match suspension, after picking up 10 yellow cards in the season. And of course, he served his first one against Brentford, and we saw how open Fulham were there. Now, of course, it was Brentford at home, so there was a bit of an advantage there, of course, for them. But I would say that Odegaard, more than likely, is going to be operating in the areas that I would see Palhinha primarily covering, if that makes sense. So Odegaard loves operating in the spaces in between midfield and defence, and without Palhinha there, I think he could do some damage. So I'm actually really not that tempted, after saying it out loud, really, by that -4. Although as tempting as a -4 is to bring in another double game week player in someone like Matoma or McAllister for Odegaard, I actually think this might be a week where Odegaard returns and brings us back to those original days of owning him, to be honest. So I feel like he's definitely a hold for me now. And then, of course, last but not least, it's Marcus Rashford against Southampton. We'll have to see again how many minutes he gets against Real Betis, something maybe to consider. I think he is the man of the moment for Erik ten Hag, though. I think he puts a lot of faith in him. It's a shame, really, how much faith I think needs to be put into him, because it does weigh heavy on a United player's shoulders, especially after losing 7-0 against Liverpool. It's something that I think we need to be watching and just be careful of in the near future, just because we can see that we know that Manchester United have fallen into this trap a few times where, the form starts to take maybe a little bit of a turn. We've had dips. The beginning of the season wasn't particularly very good, if any of you remember well as well. And I don't think that we'll see that, but it's just something, again, to keep in mind that longer term, maybe we just have to look and watch Rashford in terms of his outputs. Then onto the front three, we do have Ivan Toney. Fantastic output against Fulham. Very happy with him. Of course, scoring his 100% record penalty of number 22, which is absolutely phenomenal. 22 out of 22. I think he scored 15 now in the Premier League, which is an absolutely fantastic number. I'm very, very happy to own him now. It's like I said, the wild card is all about restructuring, so it just made sense to bring him in, and he was always more than likely going to be my captaincy option for game week 27, and I feel like I'm going to be doing that. We then have Nottingham Forest at home for Harry Kane. Of course, as mentioned, he is playing AC Milan this evening, so something to consider and just watch out for. And then, of course, we have Erling Haaland against Crystal Palace away. So, all in all, I think this starting 11 is really, really strong here for Game Week 27. Of course, there are people that will be wildcarding this week as well that may be able to put out a similar type of team. They've got a bit more information than us now, because the likes of Robert Sanchez, of course, being benched by De Zerbi means that those people who have delayed the wildcard have just got that extra bit of information. They've also seen, of course, what Matoma and McAllister's output was against West Ham, which maybe puts them off going for Solly March, and I hope that's the case as he becomes maybe even more of a differential in that scenario. So we'll have to see what happens, but going into captaincy, vice-captaincy and bench options then, as mentioned, I'm pretty certain that the captaincy will be on Ivan Toney and the vice-captaincy going on to Solly March. We've therefore got a bench of Kepa, and as mentioned, if I don't make any transfers at all, he will probably come in for Robert Sanchez, as I don't foresee him playing any of these games for Brighton. We then have James Maddison on the bench as the first option against Chelsea, followed by Botman against Wolves and Gabriel against Fulham. So this is actually a pretty strong bench, and I could potentially push the button on the bench boost a few weeks early. But it's just that double game week 29 looks absolutely phenomenal and way too juicy to turn down, to be honest. So I think I'm going to hold fire, but it is something to consider for those of you that may be looking for something a little bit different. Moving into the mini league, then we'll just have a quick review on this. I've now dropped down to 7th, thank God. I didn't want to end up winning my own league, so thankfully I'm now pretty much 50 points behind FPL Boo Boo with a phenomenal 74 points. K Sarah, of course, there with 84 points. I think these are individuals that probably kept hold of Salah more than likely. We then had Jan Aigner scoring 2 more points than me on 39. James P there with 41 points. Harry and Paul with 51, and George McGavin up there with 49 points. But yeah, it looks like it's, 50 points less is pretty significant, to be honest, for me now. So I feel like I'm probably going to fade away on the back end of the season, which is what I wanted. For anybody that is joining the channel and is new to it, it is a completely free to join mini league, and there will be a prize for the winner at the end of the season. So feel free to check out the link in the description below or use the code that's in the details below too. And finally, just before I sign off for this video today, guys, we are going to take a quick look at FPLGameweek.com's content creator mock mini league. We still see Harry Daniels up there, or FPL Harry as he's known on YouTube, as number 1, comfortably about 20 plus points now ahead of Rich Clark in the second spot. We have seen Ben Crellin just drop off a little bit with his 38 points there, very similar to me in terms of his wildcard, I guess. But ultimately, yeah, we've seen so many wildcard activations here across the Content Creator League, and you can see that pretty much all of us have been in the same boat. But yeah, I mean, I'm still very happy, as I say, to be amongst some very formidable names here. To be 16th in that league total is very, very promising for me still. And I think we can still push into maybe the top 10 before the end of the season. But I think that's going to wrap it up, guys. And thank you very much for bearing with me. I've kind of been a bit stop-starty on this, so maybe the editing showcases that, but I have still got a bit of a cough and I'm a bit nasally, so I apologise for the audio quality on this video, but I hope you found the content useful, guys. If you are new to the channel, then please do consider subscribing to me, and of course I will be putting out as much content as I can between now and the end of the season, trying to help you achieve the best rank possible. And of course I will be doing a live stream. I'll be back to old ways essentially, and doing a live stream for Game Week 27, so feel free to join me on that. But until next time, guys, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.